Welcome to Chapter 3, Consent Management. In this chapter, we will dive deep into one of the most crucial aspects of the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, DPDP Act, which is consent management. Consent is a cornerstone of the DPDP Act as it governs the collection, processing, and sharing of personal data. The Act emphasizes that personal data can only be processed when there is clear, informed, and voluntary consent from the data principal, the individual whose data is being processed. This chapter delves into the requirements for obtaining and managing consent, the principles of consent under the DPDP Act, how consent withdrawal works, and the critical role of consent managers. Requirements for obtaining and managing consent. Let's start by exploring the key requirements for obtaining and managing consent as per the DPDP Act. Section 6 of the DPDP Act outlines the basic requirements for obtaining consent. Consent must be free, specific, informed, unambiguous, and based on a clear affirmative action. These requirements ensure that data collection is transparent and that individuals have control over their personal data. Additionally, there is a new requirement under the amendments to Section 10 that mandates parental consent for children under the age of 18. Consent for minors must be verifiable, and it must come from a parent or guardian. For example, a mobile app providing educational services to children must ensure that the parent's consent is verified, perhaps through identity verification systems like the digital locker. Verification of parental consent. Continuing from the last point, verifying parental consent for children under 18 is now mandatory. The data fiduciary is responsible for implementing methods that confirm the relationship between the child and the consenting adult. For example, a platform offering educational services to children must ask parents to upload official identification, such as an Aadhaar card, to validate the consent. This step ensures that data is not collected without proper oversight. Granular consent management. Let's now talk about granular consent management. With the amendments to the DPDP Act, data fiduciaries must now ensure that consent is collected separately for different processing purposes. This means that businesses cannot bundle consent for multiple activities. For instance, a video streaming service must request separate consent for processing data related to content recommendations, marketing, and location tracking. Consent must be specific and aligned with each purpose for which data is being collected. Transparency in data collection. Transparency is a core principle under the DPDP Act. Consent must always be accompanied by clear and accessible information. The data principal needs to be fully informed about what data is being collected, how it will be used, and whether it will be shared with any third parties. For example, a children's online gaming platform must clearly inform parents and children about what data is being collected, such as name, age, and location, and how this data will be used, e.g. for tracking game performance. Informed and voluntary consent. Consent begins with transparency. Data fiduciaries must clearly inform the data principal about why their data is collected, how it will be used, and who will have access to it. For example, when signing up on an e-commerce platform, users must know what data, such as their name, address, or payment details, is being collected and how it will be used for order processing or shared with third parties like payment gateways. Specificity of consent. Consent should never be generic. It must be purpose-specific. Each data collection purpose should be disclosed separately, ensuring users can consent to one activity, like shipping, while declining another, like marketing communications. Unambiguous and affirmative action consent must be an active choice. Users should express agreement through clear actions, such as checking a box or clicking yes to confirm their consent for specific data processing. Granular consent. For multiple purposes, data fiduciaries must obtain separate, explicit consent. For instance, a mobile app requesting data for location tracking, notifications, and analytics must allow users to choose which purposes they agree to individually. No coercion or pressure consent must always be free of coercion. Users should have the freedom to decline data collection unless it is essential for a core service, such as registering an account. These principles collectively ensure that consent is informed, voluntary, and aligned with the data principal's rights. Free, specific, informed, and unambiguous consent. Let's now discuss the 4 key components that must be satisfied for consent to be valid. These are free consent. Consent must be given voluntarily without any undue influence or coercion. For instance, a cloud service provider should not require users to consent to marketing emails as a condition for using their storage service. Specific consent. Consent must be tied to specific purposes. It can't be general or bundled across multiple uses. Example, a health app must obtain separate consent for processing different kinds of health data, such as medical records, location data, and usage data. Informed consent. The data fiduciary must provide enough information for the data principal to make an informed decision about the data processing. Example, before collecting feedback, a website should inform users that their responses will be used for product improvement and that they can withdraw their consent at any time. Unambiguous consent. Consent must be given through a clear affirmative action, such as ticking a box or clicking yes to consent to processing. Example, streaming services often ask users for consent via a clear accept button to share viewing data for recommendations. Consent withdrawal and its implications. Now, let's look at consent withdrawal. Under Section 6.4 of the DPDP Act, data principals have the right to withdraw their consent at any time. The process of withdrawal must be as easy and straightforward as giving consent. How consent withdrawal works. Once consent is withdrawn, the data fiduciary must immediately cease processing the personal data for the specific purpose for which consent was given. However, this doesn't affect the legality of the data processing that occurred prior to the withdrawal. For example, if a customer withdraws consent for promotional emails, they will stop receiving future emails, but will retain access to their account and previous purchases. Impact of consent withdrawal. When consent is withdrawn, 2 critical actions must be taken by the data fiduciary to ensure compliance with regulations. First, cessation of data processing. The data fiduciary must immediately stop processing personal data for the specific purpose for which consent was granted. However, it's important to note that any processing carried out before the withdrawal remains lawful under Section 6.5. For example, if a customer withdraws consent for receiving promotional emails, they will no longer receive such emails in the future. However, they will still retain access to their account and past purchase history. Continued data retention for legal purposes. Withdrawal of consent does not absolve the data fiduciary from their obligation to retain data if required by law or for contractual purposes, as per Section 8.7. For instance, a financial institution may retain transaction records for a legally mandated period, even if the customer has withdrawn consent for marketing communications. These measures ensure a balance between respecting user rights and fulfilling legal or contractual responsibilities. Possible consequences of withdrawal. Withdrawal of consent is a fundamental right for data principals, but it may come with certain consequences. While data fiduciaries are obligated to honor the withdrawal, it can lead to limitations in the services provided. For example, a user of a music streaming service who withdraws consent for data sharing may lose access to personalized recommendations or other features that rely on data processing. These potential impacts highlight the balance between respecting user choices and the functionalities enabled by data. It's essential to ensure that users are informed about these consequences when making their decision to withdraw consent. Role of consent managers. Now let's look at the role of consent managers. A consent manager is an entity that acts as an intermediary between the data principal and the data fiduciary. It ensures that data principals can give, review, and withdraw consent with transparency. Key functions of consent managers. 1. Centralized consent platform. They provide a platform for data principals to manage their consents across multiple data fiduciaries. Example, a digital consent management platform lets users track and modify which services they've consented to, whether it's for email marketing or personalized content. 2. Ensuring compliance. Consent managers help ensure that data fiduciaries are adhering to the provisions of the DPDP Act by tracking consents and ensuring that they're updated, valid, and withdrawn when necessary. 3. Data protection and security. They also take responsibility for ensuring that consent data is stored and transmitted securely, protecting it from unauthorized access or misuse. Accountability of consent managers. Consent managers must be registered with the Data Protection Board of India and must operate under strict legal and operational conditions as prescribed by the central government. Conclusion and key takeaways. To summarize, consent is a cornerstone of the DPDP Act. The following are the key takeaways from this chapter. 1. Clear and transparent consent. Data fiduciaries must request and manage consent in a way that is specific, informed, and free from coercion. 2. Right to withdraw consent. Data principals have the right to withdraw consent at any time with minimal disruption to the services they use. 3. Role of consent managers. Consent managers act as intermediaries to ensure that consent is obtained, tracked, and withdrawn in compliance with the DPDP Act. By following these principles, businesses can create a transparent and accountable data processing framework that respects the privacy of individuals. Thank you for completing this chapter. In the next chapter, we will explore the rights of data principals, including their right to access, correction, and erasure of their personal data under the DPDP Act. Thank you for joining this session. In the next lesson, we will explore the data processing and handling, diving deeper into how this vital code operates. See you soon. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more valuable legal insights and updates. youtube.com/@prolegalminds. If you have any legal questions or need assistance, visit us at prolegalminds.com to connect with our expert team. We're here to help you navigate the complexities of the law with confidence. Stay informed, stay empowered. See you in the next session.